Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, born in 1889 in Austria, was one of the most infamous dictators of the 20th century, who completely changed the political and social landscape of Europe during his rule. After serving as a soldier in World War I, Hitler took advantage of Germany's weakness after its defeat and the 1929 economic crisis to build the Nazi Party and become chancellor in 1933. Once in power, Hitler quickly silenced all opposition. He created the secret police, the Gestapo, and the SS forces to control the population and crush political enemies. At the same time, propaganda grew under his control, using all means to spread extreme nationalism and anti-Jewish ideas. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were passed, officially taking away citizenship rights from Jewish people and excluding them from German society. Hitler did not only want control inside Germany, but also wanted to expand territory. He openly broke the Treaty of Versailles by rearming Germany and carried out invasions from annexing Austria in 1938 to occupying Czechoslovakia, and then starting the invasion of Poland in 1939. These actions started World War II, a brutal six-year war that killed over 70 million people, including about 40 million civilians. Alongside military campaigns, Hitler directed the Holocaust genocide plan. Over 6 million Jews were systematically killed in concentration camps and death camps like Auschwitz and Treblinka. Millions of Roma people, homosexuals, and other minority groups were also victims. Life in these camps was horrific, with brutal killings and forced labor causing mass deaths. As the war neared its end and Allied forces approached Berlin, Hitler chose to commit suicide in his bunker on April 30, 1945. Though dead, his legacy remains a terrifying lesson about unchecked power, extremism, and the disasters they can bring to humanity. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin, born in 1878 in Georgia, was the Soviet Union's leader known for his cruelty in building and strengthening his power. After Lenin's death, Stalin took power and quickly set up a dictatorship with total control. He did not hesitate to use violence to remove political rivals through brutal purges. The Great Purge from 1936 to 1938 was one of the most terrifying campaigns under Stalin's rule, causing over 1.5 million executions and millions more arrested or sent to forced labor camps called gulags. Life in the gulags was harsh, with forced labor and lack of medical care leading to millions of deaths during Stalin's time. His policy of collectivizing farms also caused a humanitarian disaster, especially in Ukraine in the 1930s. The Holodomor famine was caused by food confiscation and forcing peasants into collectives, leading to 3 to 7 million deaths by starvation. Stalin also forced relocation of populations for political control, causing much suffering. During World War II, the Soviet Union under Stalin lost about 20 million people, but helped defeat Nazi Germany. After the war, Stalin strengthened his power, expanded influence over Eastern Europe by creating communist satellite states, and started the Cold War with the West. Stalin died in 1953, leaving behind a militarily and economically strong country, but one full of suffering caused by his brutal and harsh policies. Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong, born in 1893 in Hunan Province, China, founded the People's Republic of China and led the Communist Party from 1949 until his death. He was the central figure in a long revolution that pushed out the Nationalist Party and unified the country under communism. From 1958 to 1962, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward to push industrialization and farm collectivization, hoping to increase production and modernize China. But poor management and fake production targets caused a terrible famine that killed an estimated 30 to 45 million people, one of the worst humanitarian disasters of the 20th century. Later, from 1966 to 1976, Mao started the Cultural Revolution to purge counter-revolutionaries and strengthen his personal power. This caused social chaos, with millions persecuted, imprisoned, or killed. Many cultural and traditional sites were destroyed, plunging the country into a decade of disorder. Mao controlled society strictly through propaganda, censorship, and crushing dissent. Though he helped modernize China and laid foundations for development, his legacy is highly controversial due to the huge social and human costs. He died in 1976, leaving behind a nation both developing and deeply wounded by his harsh and dictatorial policies. Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini, born in 1883 in Italy, was the founder and leader of the Italian fascist movement and dictator from 1922 to 1943. Before gaining power, Mussolini was a socialist journalist and politician, but his disappointment in political and economic chaos pushed him to fascism with extreme nationalism and centralized power. In 1922, he organized the March on Rome, forcing King Victor Emmanuel III to make him prime minister, starting a totalitarian dictatorship. Mussolini quickly destroyed democracy by banning opposition parties, using secret police and paramilitary forces MVSN to suppress resistance. He created the image of Il Duce, the great leader ruling with an iron fist and strong propaganda. His policies emphasized militarization and territorial expansion. In 1935, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, where the Italian army used chemical weapons and committed war crimes, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. Though condemned internationally, he continued to expand influence in North Africa and the Mediterranean. Mussolini allied closely with Hitler and Nazi Germany, leading Italy to join World War II on the Axis side. Despite some early military successes, Italy's army weakened after defeats in North Africa, Greece, and the Eastern Front, causing heavy losses. Domestically, Mussolini suppressed opposition parties, controlled the press and propaganda, and enforced harsh laws to maintain power. Personal freedoms were removed, and a police state was established. Education and media glorified him and fascist ideology. In 1943, after military failures and internal pressure, Mussolini was removed and arrested. In 1945, he was captured and executed by Italian resistance forces. His legacy is a heavily damaged Italy, a ruined economy, and deeply divided society. His fascist regime became a symbol of brutal dictatorship and catastrophic war. Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung, born in 1912 in Korea under Japanese rule, was the founder and supreme leader of North Korea from 1948 until his death in 1994. He joined the anti-Japanese guerrilla movement and received Soviet support to build power after Japan's defeat in World War II. Once in power, Kim quickly built a communist dictatorship with a strong personality cult. Strict control of information and thought was enforced through secret police and political police, crushing all opposition. Many were arrested, tortured, or executed for suspected disloyalty. North Korea became one of the most isolated and tightly controlled countries in the world. In 1950, Kim Il-sung started the Korean War by invading the South, sparking a 3-year conflict involving the UN and China. The war killed 2 to 3 million people, including many civilians, and permanently divided the peninsula along the 38th parallel. During his rule, Kim implemented a centrally planned economy with collectivization and military buildup. However, isolation, lack of investment, and poor management caused repeated economic crises, especially a severe famine in the 1990s that killed hundreds of thousands to millions due to food shortages. Kim's regime maintained power by total control, personality cult, and large-scale propaganda. He died in 1994, leaving a North Korea still isolated, poor, and ruled by a family dynasty continued by his son and grandson. Pol Pot, born around 1925, was the leader of the Khmer Rouge and dictator of Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. He rose from a communist movement against the pro-Western government and led the Khmer Rouge to take Phnom Penh in 1975. He immediately declared the Democratic Republic of Kampuchea, but turned the country into one of the most extreme regimes of the 20th century. Pol Pot's regime aimed to build a pure farming society with no cities, intellectuals, or foreign influences. He ordered the evacuation of all cities, forcing millions to rural labor camps. Those considered intellectuals, foreigners, or even just people who wore glasses were seen as enemies and killed. Under his rule, an estimated 1.5 to 2 million people, about 25% of Cambodia's population, died from forced labor, starvation, disease, and executions. At torture centers like S21, thousands were tortured and killed, symbolizing horrific brutality. Pol Pot kept power by spreading fear, suppressing opposition, and ruthlessly purging anyone considered a threat. The Khmer Rouge regime was overthrown in 1979 when Vietnamese forces entered Cambodia, ending Pol Pot's brutal rule. Though he died in 1998, his legacy left deep wounds on Cambodian society, which took decades to recover. Idi Amin, Idi Amin, born around 1925 in Uganda, was a military dictator known for brutal and infamous rule from 1971 to 1979. Starting as a regular soldier in the British colonial army, Amin rose quickly due to harshness and political skill. In 1971, he led a military coup to overthrow President Milton Obote and ruled Uganda with an iron fist. Amin's regime was known for violent policies and widespread chaos. He carried out mass political purges, executing or imprisoning tens of thousands suspected of opposing or threatening his power. Estimates say 300,000 to 500,000 people were killed during his rule, with many tortured and murdered in brutal ways. Amin ruled by fear, turning Uganda into a police state. One of his most controversial actions was expelling all people of Indian descent, who controlled many businesses in 1972. This caused a severe economic collapse and increased hardship for ordinary Ugandans. Amin seized expelled people's property and shared it with the army and close allies, spreading corruption and deepening economic crisis. Internationally, Amin's chaotic and violent rule made Uganda isolated. In 1979, supported by Tanzanian-backed rebels, Amin was overthrown and fled into exile in Libya and later Saudi Arabia, where he lived until his death in 2003. His legacy is one of Africa's bloodiest and most chaotic dictatorships, leaving Uganda shattered and deeply wounded, needing decades to recover. Francisco Franco, born in 1892, was a military general and dictator of Spain from 1939 until his death in 1975. He rose during the Spanish Civil War, 1936–1939, by leading the nationalist forces against the Republican government. Franco's victory began a nearly 40-year military dictatorship. After taking power, Franco quickly set up a regime with absolute control, harshly suppressing all opposition including communists, socialists, and separatist movements. After the war, tens of thousands were executed or imprisoned in political purges. Franco maintained a strict censorship system over the press, education, and arts to keep control. His regime restricted civil liberties, controlled religion and language, especially in ethnic regions like Catalonia and the Basque Country. Though Spain did not directly join World War II, Franco sided with Germany and Italy. The economy saw periods of recovery, but was held back by conservative policies and international isolation in early decades. Economic reforms in the late 1950s and 1960s helped Spain grow faster, but the dictatorship's influence remained strong. Franco died in 1975, paving the way for Spain's transition to democracy. His legacy is a country with deep political and social wounds and long-lasting divisions, serving as a harsh lesson on the effects of prolonged dictatorship. Saddam Hussein, born in 1937 in Iraq, was a dictator who ruled from 1979 until his overthrow in 2003. He was known for brutal rule, constant wars, and serious human rights abuses. Once in power, Saddam concentrated absolute authority and used security forces and secret police to crush all opposition without mercy. His regime carried out violent political purges, arresting, torturing, and killing tens of thousands. From 1980 to 1988, Saddam started the Iran-Iraq War, which killed about 1 million people. He also used chemical weapons in military attacks, notably the 1988 Halabja massacre that killed thousands of Kurds, a crime against humanity. In 1990, Saddam invaded Kuwait, leading to the 1991 Gulf War with an international coalition led by the US. Though defeated, Saddam kept control through brutal repression. He ran prison camps and violently oppressed civilians and opposition groups, especially Kurds and Shiites, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths and creating deep fear. In 2003, the US and coalition invaded Iraq to remove Saddam's regime. He was captured, tried, and executed in 2006 for crimes against humanity. Saddam's legacy is a deeply divided, politically unstable Iraq with ongoing conflicts and severe economic and security problems. His regime's collapse caused ongoing regional turmoil affecting the Middle East and the world. Muammar Gaddafi, born in 1942 in Libya, was a dictator who ruled Libya from 1969 until his overthrow in 2011. He took power after a military coup that removed King Idris and quickly established a totalitarian regime with centralized authority. Gaddafi called himself the revolutionary leader and controlled all political, economic, and social life. During his over 40 years in power, Gaddafi used secret police and security forces to suppress dissent and opposition groups. Thousands were arrested, tortured, or killed for opposing him. His government strictly censored media, education, and arts to control ideas and stop any resistance. In foreign policy, Gaddafi was known for aggressive stances, supporting armed groups and rebel organizations worldwide, leading to Libya's international isolation for decades. He was accused of involvement in terrorist attacks like the 1988 Lockerbie bombing that killed over 270 people. Though Libya had rich oil resources and some social development projects, corruption and poor management caused instability. During the 2011 Arab Spring, Libyans rose up against Gaddafi. After months of civil war, Gaddafi was captured and killed in October 2011. His legacy is a severely damaged country facing political, social, and economic crises. Libya remains unstable, with ongoing conflicts and suffering that continue to this day. Augusto Pinochet. Augusto Pinochet, born in 1915 in Chile, was a military dictator from 1973 to 1990 after overthrowing President Salvador Allende in a coup. With army support, Pinochet quickly set up an absolute dictatorship, ending democracy in Chile and starting a violent and repressive rule. Right after taking power, Pinochet dissolved Congress, banned political parties, and created strong security forces like the National Police and Political Police, DINA, to control and suppress the population. About 3,200 people were killed or disappeared under his rule, with tens of thousands tortured in prisons and torture centers like Villa Grimaldi and Londres 38. These acts aimed to crush all opposition, especially leftists and ethnic minorities. Chile's economy under Pinochet was shaped by free market policies from the Chicago Boys. These reforms brought impressive economic growth in the 1980s, but also increased social inequality, leaving many poor behind. Privatization and reduced government role made the economy dynamic but caused deep social divisions. Although he held a referendum in 1988 to keep power, the result rejected him, starting Chile's transition to democracy. Pinochet stepped down in 1990 but stayed as army commander until 1998, keeping strong political influence. He died in 2006 without ever being officially convicted for human rights abuses, but his name remains deeply controversial as a symbol of repression, violence, and the lasting effects of dictatorship in modern Chile. Nicolae Ceaușescu. Nicolae Ceaușescu, born in 1918 in Romania, became leader of the Romanian Communist Party in 1965 and dictator until 1989. Over nearly 25 years, Ceaușescu turned Romania into one of Eastern Europe's most strict and harsh communist countries. When he took power, Ceaușescu centralized authority, setting up strict control over political, social, and cultural life. He built a personality cult through media and propaganda, making people see him as an irreplaceable leader. His government used the secret police, Securitate, to spy on and suppress suspected opponents. Dissidents were arrested, tortured, or imprisoned in harsh conditions. Censorship and limits on free speech created a society filled with fear and distrust. Ceaușescu's economic policies caused a humanitarian disaster. He pushed for self-sufficiency and forced people to repay foreign debts by cutting domestic consumption. This caused long shortages of food, electricity, water, and essentials, making life very hard for many, while the ruling class lived lavishly. In 1989, when democratic movements spread across Europe, Romanians rose up against Ceaușescu. After a few days of revolt, his government collapsed. He and his wife were captured, quickly tried, and executed in December 1989. His fall marked the end of harsh communism in Romania and the start of a new era for the country. Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro, born in 1926 in Cuba, was a revolutionary leader and communist dictator ruling Cuba from 1959 to 2008. He started his political career by leading a revolution against dictator Fulgencio Batista, successfully overthrowing him in 1959 and setting up a communist state modeled after the Soviet Union. From the start, Castro centralized power in himself and the Communist Party, making Cuba a one-party state with strict control over all life. He established strong propaganda, censored the press and education to maintain loyalty. Political opposition was brutally suppressed, with thousands arrested or exiled. His policies nationalized land, industries, and services, making Cuba's economy heavily dependent on Soviet and socialist support. Though Cuba made advances in healthcare and education, people suffered shortages due to a U.S. economic embargo lasting over 50 years. Limits on personal freedoms and strict control over religion, speech, and expression caused many Cubans to try to escape. Over more than 40 years in power, Castro maintained a stable dictatorship and a personality cult. Some praised him for resisting international pressure and keeping Cuba independent, but many condemned his human rights abuses and political repression. In 2008, due to failing health, Fidel handed power to his brother Raul Castro. Though no longer in charge, his influence remained strong in Cuban politics and society. Castro's legacy is a Cuba with social achievements, but also a symbol of dictatorship and limits on human freedoms, facing ongoing challenges today. Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad, born in 1965, has been Syria's leader since 2000 after succeeding his father Hafez al-Assad, who ruled the country for nearly 30 years. At first, many hoped Bashar would bring reforms, but in reality, he quickly continued the dictatorship, tightly controlling all aspects of Syrian society. Under Bashar, Syria maintains a strong security system with secret police and military forces always ready to suppress opposition. Freedom of speech, press, and expression are strictly censored, and anyone suspected of opposition risks arrest, torture, or mysterious disappearance. In 2011, during the Arab Spring, widespread protests demanding democracy broke out across the Middle East, including Syria. Bashar responded with large-scale repression, using military forces to crack down on protesters and opposition groups, leading to a long civil war causing hundreds of thousands of deaths and millions displaced. His government is accused of chemical weapon attacks, drawing strong international condemnation. The war has made Syria one of the most unstable and chaotic regions in the world today, with many factions, rebel groups, and foreign forces involved. Assad keeps power thanks to support from Russia and Iran and continues political repression at home. Though regarded as a dictator by many international organizations, Bashar al-Assad has remained in power for over 2 decades. His legacy is a deeply divided, devastated country facing an ongoing serious humanitarian crisis. Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe, born in 1924 in southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, was a key leader in the liberation movement against British colonial rule and became Zimbabwe's first prime minister when it gained independence in 1980. At first, he was praised as a national hero who led the country out of colonialism and built a self-governing nation. However, after many years in power, Mugabe became a powerful dictator, maintaining a one-party system with strict control by the military and police. He launched violent campaigns to eliminate political opponents, especially in the 1980s with the Gukurahundy massacre that killed about 20,000 people in Matabeleland, a major scar in the country's history. Mugabe also implemented controversial economic policies, notably a land reform program in the 2000s that involved expelling white farmers who owned large land and redistributing the land to black farmers without experience. Though aimed at social justice, this caused agricultural collapse, severe economic crisis, hyperinflation reaching millions of %, and increased poverty nationwide. Under Mugabe, Zimbabwe became a symbol of corruption, political instability, and human rights abuses. He was repeatedly re-elected in elections accused of fraud, used violence to maintain power, and suppressed all opposition voices. Zimbabwean society saw severe declines in education, health, and infrastructure. In 2017, under pressure from the military and protest movements, Mugabe resigned after nearly 4 decades in power. He died in 2019, leaving a complex legacy, as both a liberation hero and a dictator who caused much suffering and crisis for Zimbabwe.